Brianna, welcome to the show today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Brianna, I'm really excited because I've got like a fellow Australian with me, which is really uncommon given that I live in the Philippines. So I'm really interested to pick your brain today and learn more about like these statistics. What ones do we need to actually pay attention to? And what ones do we need to rule out and just ignore? But before we do, Brianna, tell us a bit about yourself. How did you get into the world of podcasting?
Well, I was a musician for many, many years, a touring musician. I did a degree in audio production and I released a couple of albums. I actually was on TV for a while. I was a bit famous, and that was a very funny part of my life. And when I sort of came back from that and I'd finished touring and doing all the things, I wanted to have a baby with my husband. And so we had a baby. That was good. And then we had to move to Cairns because my husband at the time was a doctor. So we moved up there because it was his intern year. And I had a 14-month-old, I think, something like that. And I was thinking, I don't really want to do that life again that I was doing before as a musician, touring and all the gear and the late nights and all the stuff. It's just not really conducive to the way I wanted to raise a family. So I started up there in Cairns looking for work. And of course, nothing was coming up that wasn't tourism in Cairns. And so I went online and I put myself on as a freelancer on a site called upwork.com. This was many years ago now. This was about 8 years ago. And I came across this thing called podcasting. Back then, 8 years ago, here in Australia, it wasn't really a thing. But in America, it had been going for a few years already. They're about probably about 5 years ahead of us. And so I started finding these things that were called podcasts on Upwork and realized that as an audio person, I would be pretty well suited to editing podcasts. Never had done it before, but I thought, I've got a degree, I should be fine. So I put my name out there and I applied for this job with this guy called Mark Mabry, and he worked with a guy called Tim Ballard. Now, if you Google Tim Ballard, you will see that he is quite a well-known guy. He is an ex-CIA agent who stopped working for the government because he couldn't do what he wanted to do to break up these child sex trafficking rings. So he was kind of stopped by the government to do the things he needed to do in the way he wanted to do them. So he started his own company called Underground Railroad, and they have a podcast. And I was picked for the job to be their audio producer for this podcast. And it was the most incredible experience of my life. This was my first proper podcasting gig. And they were talking about breaking up these sex trafficking rings, rescuing these children from these terrible situations all over the world. And I was sitting there editing it, just bawling my eyes out and putting foley and music and everything behind it. And I just thought, what an incredible thing podcasting is, because the ability to storytell in that way and really craft emotion through speech and foley and music and make someone really feel something felt so important to me that I just fell in love with it. And then the rest is history. From there, it just went boom, 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 boom. And now we work with over 60 clients globally. We have a company that has 7 staff or 8 staff at this point, and I just love it.
Yeah, Bamby Media was formed, which is great.
Mm-hmm.
So, Brianna, I totally get what you mean in terms of the emotion that a podcast can make you feel as a listener. I know I've actually got a podcast through our agency, and I'm going to do the show notes for it. And I actually just said to one of our team, I need to do it on the weekend because it's one about like a coward punch. Someone got hit from behind and the child died. And I'm just like, I don't think I'm going to be productive for the rest of the day. So from a production perspective, you really get an insight and quite often the tears are flowing, which is pretty amazing from a podcast perspective that we're allowed to, I suppose, see behind the scenes and really be part of this amazing storytelling. It's a pretty special gift.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah. Now let's talk about like podcasting in from a statistics perspective. Now I know you've done a lot of research in this space. What statistics are important to measure, and which are the ones that we maybe should, aren't as relevant and not give as much weight to?
Sure. Okay, so I think the first thing to say about statistics is everyone goes on about the charts, being in the charts, the Apple charts and the Spotify charts. And while that's good, there's such a small amount of people, podcasts, that are in the charts. And so if you're trying to get onto them and that's your metric of being a good show, you're going to be disappointed because it's not something that is easy to do. And in fact, the way to get on the charts does change from time to time. So it can be a little bit more of a moving target, I suppose. The other thing with the charts as well is that the companies like Apple and Spotify and stuff, they don't actually tell you the definitive answer as to how to get onto those charts, like what they're actually looking at for you to get there. So you can kind of just be chasing your tail a little bit with that, not really getting there. So that's something that people go on about. Oh, yes, I'm number 5 or I'm number 10 or whatever. But it also changes just like every day or every couple of days. And if you've got a podcast that is new and it has a whole bunch of episodes and people are downloading them, then they're going to be in the charts for a while and then they're going to go away. And so it's just not really something you need to worry about as much. Unless if you're a massive show like Hamish and Andy or something like that, you're always going to be in the charts. Or She's on the Money is another one that does really well and always at the front of the charts. But the regular podcaster, the independent podcaster, should be not as concerned with where you are in the charts. You need to be more concerned about what kind of downloads you're getting per episode. The way to do that is to just check your podcast hosts. And there's different hosts. Sorry, you go in. Yep.
So by that, like, do you mean like look at your likes of your Apple Analytics and your Spotify Analytics and things like that, or more from the hosting platform? Which one is more powerful and I suppose give you more accurate information?
Yeah, so the hosting platform, so let's say Podbean or Buzzsprout or Captivate, Blueberry, they're a bunch of different podcast hosts. If you go to that place, the statistics within your host, you'll be able to see a culmination of all these statistics for all the platforms. That's the most specific way to get everything together. The other thing that's cool about that is it can show you which platform most of your downloads are coming from. So each client will have, in our case, will have different demographics, different audience, those sorts of things, and also different ways that people listen to their show. So some will be higher on Spotify and some will be higher on Apple. And that's important information for you to be aware of, because when you're promoting your show, if the bulk of your listeners are coming from Apple, don't share your Spotify links first, because people are coming from Apple for you. So it's important to check that.
So that's in your caption on your social medias and things like that. Is that right?
That's right, yeah. So anywhere you share a link, those sorts of things, just always share the one that you can see people are tuning in from most often on your podcast host, and that'll be the best place to go first up.
Yeah, okay. And I noticed so many people obviously they're connected to, or as a distribution channel, they're using Apple, Spotify, Google as the sort of top 3 platforms. But what other ones should you be looking out for, and how do you know which ones are going to be most relevant for your listeners?
Yeah, it's just important to be on as many as physically possible. So you've got those big ones: Apple, YouTube, Google Podcasts. Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts. But did you know that YouTube is actually the number one way that Australians connect with podcasts? So if you don't have a presence there at all, then you're missing a massive part. Now, you can't get your podcast on YouTube from a podcast host like Pods, as I mentioned before, Buzzsprout, Captivate, all those. They can't put you onto YouTube. You have to create a channel, get a playlist going, and put all your podcasts up there. But if you don't do that, then you're missing out there.
Well,
And then from the smaller platforms, you've got Overcast, Castbox, Podcast Index. There's so many of them. They capture 15 maybe percent of the rest. So once you've got Apple, Spotify, YouTube, Google Podcasts sorted, then there's still about 15% of listeners that use something else.
okay. And just to circle back to your comment about YouTube, with YouTube, so still, even if you are doing a video component of the actual podcast episode itself, you could still go and upload the audio file. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. So YouTube used to hate you doing that. They would penalize you for putting up a static graphic and then audio on it. They used to be like, no, we don't want that. We hate that. But now they've recently come out in the last 3 weeks or 4 weeks or something to say, hey, that's okay. Like, we don't hate you for that now. As long as you create a podcast playlist specifically on YouTube, so it's a playlist of just your episodes and nothing else, then that's fine. It's absolutely fine to do that. And then you can also share your snippets as shorts on YouTube.
Excellent. That's really useful to know. Now, Apple Podcast Connects also has this really cool function that helps to measure listener consumption. So I just wanted to pick your brain on that. Like, firstly, I suppose for those that aren't 100% familiar, what is listener consumption, and why is it important to know?
Oh, I love getting into the back end of the consumption rate of podcasts, because that's where you see how long a listener is actually engaging with your episode for. So if you're sitting there and you're doing like a 45-minute or an hour-long podcast, and then you go into the back end of your Apple Podcasts Connect, and you can see that they're only listening to 60% of the show, that's a pretty good indication that that episode's too long. And also, the other thing to note about that is if you're sharing a bunch of meaty content at the end, and that's when you're doing your call to actions and where to find them and all that sort of stuff, they're not listening all the way to there anyway. So it can play with how you want to share the content, what you want to say at the beginning, because you know they're listening then, and also how long you want those episodes to actually be. So minimize them if you can, and then play with the consumption after that. If you have a 40-minute episode and then next week you do a 20-minute episode and you can see the consumption rate for that is 80-90%, keep going on that trajectory and play with it.
It's a big experiment, isn't it? So
the whole thing is.
Yeah. So does Spotify have like a similar functionality on their platform?
No, Spotify doesn't have that at the moment. Spotify has some interesting little bits of extra info as far as just gender and age, which is fun to know. But yeah, again, that's only for people listening to you on Spotify. So if you don't have a large a large listenership on Spotify, and then you go in there to check Spotify stats, that's not really that accurate, because it's only those people that are on Spotify. And in saying that, Spotify skews younger too. So the younger generation listens to Spotify or uses Spotify as an app more than others. So your information you're going to get from that is a little bit off.
Skewed, yeah. And so what are the stats, like, say if you're going in from a sponsorship perspective, what are the ones that hold the most weight in that are the must-haves if you're going to go in from a sponsorship perspective?
Yeah, so if you're wanting to try and gain, is that what you're saying? Gain sponsorships and ads for your show?
That's right, yeah.
Yeah, so they're going to look at, or they're going to want to know how many downloads your episode is getting within a 30-day period. That's if you're doing a 30-day sponsorship, 4 weeks worth That's one episode a week. How many downloads is each episode getting within 30 days?
Okay, so really focus on that one. And
Yeah.
once you've got all these stats, what next? Like, how do you actually use this information to then grow your podcast?
That's a juicy question. So there's a lot of statistic building that you have to do first. You can't collate this information for a month and then go, cool, okay, I know what to do. Like, it's really something that you have to track and experiment with over a period of like 6 months. So try some things, see how they go, try some other things, see how they go. You know, play with longer episodes, play with shorter episodes. Sometimes share your things to Reels and Instagram, see how that plays into the download numbers. Sometimes write LinkedIn articles, see what that does. Pinterest, so you got to play with all these social platforms as well, track what they do with your podcast, and all of that takes time. So once you have those kind of collated stats and you can see over a longer period of time what's working, then you do more of that. And you have to, again, it's one of those things of like playing with the titles of your episodes too, and what episode titles seem to resonate really well, those sorts of things. So it's more about that when you're starting a show, you don't know what your audience really wants yet. You kind of know what you want to deliver, but that also changes over time based on what your audience is really connecting with. So until you've done really good statistic building for over a number of months, you won't really know what's going to work.
So do you just track it like on an Excel spreadsheet or something like that? Like, there's no tools as such around is there to help with this?
No, we have these big, so we don't track all the stats for all our clients. Like, we certainly track the downloads for them every month, and just look at how they're trending up or down, sort of thing, and percentage wise. But for our VIP strategy clients, the ones that have decided to take us on in that way, we have this massive spreadsheet that has all their episodes, and we track every single one, and every time they post to any social platform, what that does, the 7-day downloads, the 30-day downloads. It's a big beast of a spreadsheet, but it's also very fun.
I can imagine. Now, you guys
Yep.
actually have a paid masterclass as well. So, for people who do want to understand their stats more and to dig a little deeper and look at how you can then use that information to grow your podcast, tell us about that masterclass. What does that look like?
Yeah, so that masterclass is called Understanding Your Statistics, and it was a masterclass that we ran live, and then to watch it now as a replay, you can do that within our Pod Lovers Plus community. So the Pod Lovers Plus community is a place where you can access that masterclass and all our upcoming masterclasses. And you can join in at any time, and you just pay a monthly, subscription to do that. And it has all the resources and everything like that. It's also a group, so you have discussions in there if you're trying to figure out your statistics and things aren't working and you want some feedback on it, then you post to the group, and I actually jump in there and go, okay, cool, maybe try this, or have you tracked this yet, or those sorts of things. So it's very valuable, and then every month the topic changes. So it's pretty cool. I'm really obsessed with it. I think it's pretty awesome.
It's so good that there's a support network there, because I think a lot of podcasters feel like they're going it alone. So to help dissect and to speak to people who understand our language as well is really important. Now, Brianna,
100%.
I just want to take it to a different spin and take a more helicopter view on podcasting and just understand what's happening in the industry as a whole. You've been doing some research lately, and I know you're constantly researching. But how are we looking on the podcasting front? Is there more awareness? Is it growing around
Oh,
podcasting?
yes. It is, Danielle. It's so exciting to see where the Australian podcasting market specifically is sitting. Even the growth that we've had over the past 2 years versus where we were before is quite incredible. We're now neck and neck with the consumption of podcasts here as well. Like, we're the same as the American market, which is just awesome. So the actual listenership has gone up so much. We now have most recent statistics have told us that people are listening to podcasts for over 7 hours a week now, which is crazy good. That's for people that obviously listen to podcasts, on a regular basis. But 7 hours, that's a long time. You can consume a lot of content.
Yeah, that's huge, because I think from memory last year it was like 5 hours. So as a percentage increase, it's significant.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's really, really cool. There's a lot of amazing statistics within something called the Infinite Dial, and that gets released once a year. And I break that down in the masterclass too, but that's where you get all the juicy goodness.
Infinite Dial. Okay, I'm just making a note of that. So
Yeah.
what are the average number of shows? Like a typical person would, obviously those that do follow podcasting, and I think with some of the latest stats, it's like 90% of people now know and understand what a podcast is about. So that's grown significantly. But how many average shows are people subscribing to?
On average, it's 8. So if you're listening to, there's a few different ones. Let me just get to the exact part of this, just so that I say the right number here. Here we go. Okay, so for the people that listen to podcasts on a really regular basis, the Australian market listens to between 7 and 8 podcasts in a week. There are also a large percentage of people that listen to 11 or more. And that used to be so much lower a couple of years ago. So it's really, the visibility for podcasting is great. And if you don't have one already, or if you've started one and you're kind of in the baby podcast area, you are so well positioned to really take advantage of this, because you already have one and you're already out there.
And that's really important too, because I know a lot of people say, has the horse already bolted? Is the market already flooded from podcasting? Like, do we need another podcast, podcast about podcasting, for example? But the reality is there's just more and more people joining and tuning in and starting to listen. So, and everyone's slightly different, aren't they?
Oh, 100%. I mean, you can have the same. We have podcasts, like client podcasts, that they're basically the same, as in they're business coaches or they're, marketing gurus, and they're just amazing. And they can be delivering kind of the same content, but it's so different in the way they deliver the content. And they have a different market, a different demographic, a different marketing strategy. It doesn't matter. The market is absolutely not flooded. Everyone has space. You just have to find the unique way that you want to actually deliver your content to make it engaging for someone to actually want to listen to it long term.
Yeah, great advice. Now, Brianna, for someone who wants to grow their podcast, already been going, launched, and wanting to get momentum, what are 3 practical tips that you'd give them to start to look at this statistical information and use it in a more meaningful way?
I think number 1 is that average consumption rate, 100%, because that's telling you how long people are listening for if they find your content boring. And that's that's the truth of it. If they're not listening for very long and then they tune out, you're doing something wrong. So that would be the first thing that I would look at. Go to Apple Podcast Connect, check the consumption rate of each of your episodes, and make a list of the ones that are consumed at a high percentage, and look at why that is. That's number 1. Number 2 in growing your show is to talk about it more than you're talking about it. There are plenty of people that have a podcast and they just podcast, talking into the microphone and then release it, but they don't actually mention it on their socials anywhere near enough, or they don't have a social presence at all. How do you expect people to find you, really? What are you sharing, and when are you sharing it, and where are you sharing it? Because that's huge. Marketing is essential for the growth of your show. And again, how are you doing that differently? What are you sharing? Have you got good snippets? Have you got good graphics? Have you got good branding to back up the podcast and support it?
Yeah, and I think one of the things there for me is like, don't just release it, announce an episode release and just announce it on one platform once, because the reality is people's news feeds, it's a really weird algorithm. So you might only be hitting about, 20% of your actual people who are
Yeah, not
following you.
even.
So, yeah, it's just you need to get it out there multiple times. Don't worry, your friends and family aren't going to disconnect from you. Just put yourself out there.
That's right. I mean, the different platforms that people engage with now too, everyone's so fast paced as well. So you never have to feel like you're annoying someone. If they're annoyed by you, then they'll turn you off. They'll stop following you. Okay. That's fine. That's not your market then anyway. So don't ever feel like you're being too pushy and in people's faces, because everyone's got so much going on that they're only seeing such a small amount of what you're providing anyway. And also on that point, Danielle, I think the last point for that growth metric and using the statistics is when you share on a platform, like let's say you release an episode and you get some sort of spike in downloads, and then you share something about that podcast on a platform, then you don't share it again. Most people don't share it again. So even though they have awesome content and they have a great podcast episode, they just have one graphic that they release on Instagram or something, and then that's it. There you go. Share it again a couple of days later in a different way. Put the blog article, get a blog article going, LinkedIn, anything like that. You've got to spread yourself far and often.
Excellent. Great advice. Now, Brianna, how does somebody reach out to you, understand more about the work you're doing, and continue the conversation?
They can reach me on my website, www.bambywithaymedia.com. That's where you can see all the fun stuff that goes on in a business and all the ways that you can actually work with us. If you want to have a bit more of a feel for who I am more personally, then you can go to Bamby_media on Instagram. I don't post a lot to the feed. I'm on the stories a lot, just posting about my day or, what we're working on and those sorts of things. So that's a nice way to see the inner workings of Bamby Media and how I'm going. And then to connect with a community, then that's the Pod Lovers, which is the free part of Pod Lovers Plus. So you can join the Pod Lovers and do all the free stuff in there, learn a bunch of things. I curate information. And then if you want access to the masterclasses, then you join Pod Lovers Plus.
Excellent. And also Brianna's podcast, which is Pump Up Your Pod, which I love because it's like 10, 15-minute bursts of information, which is really good in when you've got a hectic day, just to be continually upskilling on it. So, Brianna, thank you so much for being on the show today. I really appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me. I love talking about podcasting, as you can probably tell. And it's just so nice. What an industry to be in, hey? Like it feels so vibrant to me, and it's so new, and it's just such an incredible place to be a part of.
100% agree with you there.